The world celebrates Nelson Mandela. They have named stadiums after him and street names after him. But there is one great leader who played a great role in making the image of Mandela that we know and allowing him to shine without being jealous. The man is Oliver Reginald Tambo, the man who is a leader of leaders and president of presidents. This man was an architect of building a democratic South Africa, even though he didn't witness it. Welcome to Peak World. If you're new, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. Oliver Reginald Kaizana Tambo, more popularly known as Oliver Tambo or OR, was born in the village of Kantolo Bizana in the Cape Province of the Union of South Africa on October 27, 1917. His mother Julia was the third wife of Mzimeni Tambo, the son of a farmer and an assistant salesperson at a local trading store. His father had 4 wives and 10 children, and although illiterate, lived comfortably. Mzimeni Tambo was a traditionalist, but also saw the importance of Western education. Later, Mzimeni converted to Christianity, while Oliver's mother was already a devout Christian. As a young boy, he was given the task of herding his father's cattle. With his fellow herders, he soon learnt to hunt birds, take part in stick fighting, at which he was quite adept, and model animals from clay. When Tambo was 6, his father informed him that he was to start school, which was about 1 kilometer from his home. After enrolling, his teacher informed him that he had to have a school name, and therefore his father gave him the name Oliver. Tambo passed Sub-A, after which he attended another school at Mbobeni. Here he was first introduced to formal music, which became a lifelong activity and hobby. His father, intent on providing his children with a good education, moved them to the Ludek Methodist School, some 16 kilometers away from the homestead. Occasionally, his father would lend Tambo his horse to travel to school. To overcome the inconvenience of traveling the long distance to school, his father got him to board with 3 families at different times, all of whom lived near the school. In April 1928, Tambo and his brother Alan enrolled at the Anglican Holy Cross Missionary School at Flagstaff in the Eastern Cape. His father could not afford their fees, but 2 English women who were total strangers to them, Joyce and Ruth Goddard, assisted by sending a sum of £10 every year to cover their educational costs. In addition, one of his older brothers who worked as a migrant laborer in Natal, now KwaZulu-Natal, also sent part of his wages to cover additional costs. Tambo's spiritual life was nurtured at Holy Cross, where he was baptized as a Christian into the Anglican fold. At this school, Tambo became a good cricketer and football player and acquired quite a reputation as an athlete. Tambo excelled at his studies, but due to a lack of funds, he was forced to repeat Standard 6, Grade 8, twice in spite of passing at his first attempt. In 1934, he set out for St. Peter's Secondary School in Rosettenville, Johannesburg, with the assistance of Miss Tidmarsh, his former teacher. Apart from participating in football, tennis, and cricket at St. Peter's, he was also a member of the school's choir. At the age of 16, while on holiday in Kantolo, Tambo and some friends formed the Bizana Students Association, BSA. He was elected secretary of the organization, and Caledon Emda was elected chairperson. Tambo has been a leader all his life. The aim of the BSA was to mobilize students during the holidays and engage them in organized activities. Tambo was offered the position of head prefect at school, but declined in favor of another student. Instead, he took up the position of deputy head prefect. At about this time, he renounced alcohol, vowing never to consume any more, something he did throughout his life. Tragedy struck during this period as his parents passed away within a year of each other. In November 1936, he wrote his junior certificate JC examination alongside black and white students in the Transvaal, now Gauteng. For the first time in history, 2 African students, one being Tambo, passed the JC examination with a first class. The Transkei Bunga, Assembly of Chiefs, awarded him a 5-year scholarship of £30 per annum. The University of South Africa, UNISA, also awarded him a 2-year scholarship of £20. He then sat for the matriculation examinations in December 1938, which he passed with a first-class pass. Tambo initially wanted to study medicine, but at the time, no tertiary medical school accepted black students in that field. For that reason, a few years before this, A.B. Shuma went to Tuskegee's normal school in the USA to study medicine. He opted to study the sciences at the then-named College of Fort Hare. It was there that he first met Nelson Mandela, where both were members of the Students' Christian Association, SCA. From his first year, Tambo taught Sunday school. He was also part of a group of 8 students whose singing was broadcast by the local radio station in Grahamstown, Eastern Cape. At this time, Tambo was stricken with asthma, a condition that he endured throughout his life. In 1941, a white person in charge of the university kitchen assaulted black women working there. An inquiry into the issue exonerated the man involved. The students convened a meeting and, following intense debate, influenced by Tambo's guidance, staged a boycott of classes in protest. In 1942, he was unanimously elected chairperson of the Students' Committee of his residence, Beda Hall. After 3 years, Tambo graduated with a BSc degree in mathematics and physics from Fort Hare. He then enrolled for a diploma in higher education. During this period, Tambo led an initiative for students to rebuild a disused tennis court on the campus in order to pass the time on Sundays. When the tennis court was completed, the students scheduled an opening ceremony which Tambo reported to the warden. The authorities declined permission for the students to play tennis on Sundays, as they believed it was a breach of the faith. The students then embarked on a policy of non-cooperation with the university authorities. As a consequence, Tambo, who at the time was secretary of the Students' Representative Council, together 45 other students, was expelled. All but 10 of them were readmitted after 2 or 3 weeks. After his expulsion, Tambo went back to his home in Kantolo. He then applied for teaching jobs, but was turned down when prospective employers learnt that he was expelled from university. Fortunately, he was offered a position as a teacher in physics and mathematics at his alma mater, St. Peter's, where he spent 5 years. Former students taught by him recalled his engaging style of teaching and consider him an outstanding teacher. During this period, Tambo became part of a small network of the young African elite in Johannesburg. In 1942, he met Walter Sisulu, the man who recruited him and Nelson Mandela into the ANC. Sisulu was an estate agent whose office was used as a regular gathering place by young intellectuals. It was here that he also met other like-minded young people like Anton Lembede, Jordan Ngubane, and Nelson Mandela, a fellow student from Fort Hare. Sisulu invited Tambo to his house, where he was soon a regular guest on weekends. Tambo, Sisulu, Mandela, and other young intellectuals of the time regularly visited the house of Dr. A.B. Shuma, a medical doctor who was also the president of the African National Congress, ANC. Here, they formulated a plan to revive the ANC and make it more accessible to ordinary people. Tambo became informally involved in discussions of a committee of ANC members, and Zuma was responsible for drawing up a document called the African Claims in South Africa. He continued to do so until the final stages of its preparations. The ANC adopted this document at its 1943 Bloemfontein conference. The idea of a national grouping of young men was conceived by Tambo, and this idea crystallized into the beginnings of the African National Congress Youth League, African National Congress Youth League. In December 1943, the ANCYL was formally accepted by the ANC at its Congress in Botshabelo, Bloemfontein, and in September 1944, it held its official inauguration. Speakers at this meeting included Dr. Zuma, Selope Thema, Dan Tloom, and Tambo. Anton Lembede was elected president of the new ANCYL, APMD, as vice president, Tambo as its secretary, and Sisulu as the treasurer. In 1948, the National Party, NP, came into power. Discriminatory laws against Africans, Indian, and coloreds were increased, and apartheid was further entrenched. Around this time, Tambo enrolled to study law through correspondence. With the NP government passing more stringent laws against the disenfranchised population, the ANCYL, with Tambo as the scribe, prepared a program of action, selecting tactics employed by other organizations in other campaigns. The Civil Disobedience Campaign of 1946. passive resistance campaign of the Indian organizations, strikes by the labor movement, mass action by the Communist Party of South Africa, CPSA, as well as grassroots campaigns such as that of James Mpanza's Sofa-Sanki movement. This man is known as of Soweto, and E formed the Orlando Boys Club, which was renamed Orlando Pirates Football Club in 1939. At the 1948 ANC conference, the ANCYL presented its document. However, Dr. Zuma was not in favor of confrontational politics. The ANCYL resolved not to support his re-election as president unless he endorsed its program of action. The conference itself accepted the program of action, but Zuma rejected the principle of boycott tactics suggested by members of the ANCYL, Tambo and Insu Mokgele, later to become the Prime Minister of Lesotho, then convinced Dr. James S. Moroka to stand as the ANC's president. He was duly elected, and the conference formally adopted. The program of action Tambo was very influential in the movement. Tambo has been having influence in ANC for years. Lawyer. By 1948, Tambo was serving his law articles with a company of white lawyers, Max Kramer and Tuke. At the end of 1949, Tuke and Tambo joined the company of Solomon Kowalski. One of his first cases at this company was a dispute among the Bafokeng people over land rights in Rustenburg, Western Transvaal, now Northwest Province. His sound knowledge of customary law helped successfully to conclude the case. At the same time, he enrolled and studied by correspondence through the University of South Africa, studying by candlelight at home. On July 24, 1951, Tambo qualified as an attorney. Mandela, by now also a qualified lawyer, had previously approached him to join in a partnership. They set up offices in Chancellor House, Johannesburg, as the legal firm of Mandela and Tambo. As the firm became well known, people traveled long distances from around the country to seek its services. When Mandela was banned in 1951 because of political involvement, Tambo had to carry the workload on his own. In 1953, Chief Albert Luthuli was elected president of the ANC, and Tambo was appointed as national secretary in place of Walter Sisulu, who had been banned by the government because of his leading role in the 1952 Defiance campaign. Tambo was still having a desire of becoming an ordained pastor. This dream was not realized as Father Huddleston, whom Tambo had considered his spiritual mentor, was recalled to England in 1956. At the 1954 ANC Congress, Tambo was elected Secretary General. That same year, Tambo received a banning order from the state. In 1957, Tambo was voted as Deputy President of the ANC at the age of 40. During the ANC's December 1958 conference, the National Executive Committee, NEC, appointed Tambo to chair the conference. A group of former ANC members, known as the Africanists, attempted to disrupt the meeting, but Tambo was able to control the meeting, leading them to eventually leave. The Africanists broke away from the ANC and in April 1959 constituted themselves as the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC. The Africanists were not happy with the Freedom Charter phrase, "The land belongs to all who live in it, both white and black," and also rejected a multiracial worldview, instead advocating a South Africa based on African nationalism. Even today, members of the Pan-Africanist Congress call members of the ANC Charterists. In 1959, Tambo headed the ANC's Constitutional Commission. The Tambo Commission recommended that more constitutional recognition be given to the ANC Women's League, ANCWL, and the ANCYL, and endorsed non-racialism and the Freedom Charter, among other issues. The constitutional revision of the ANC came to be known as the Tambo Constitution. This man was an architect of the ANC that the members are destroying today by corruption. All the while, he had to carry the burden of political work and the work of the law firm alone, since Mandela was still on treason trial. After the Sharpeville massacre, where 69 unarmed people were killed and 180 injured, on April 8, 1960, the ANC was declared an illegal organization under the Suppression of Communism Act. The ANC leadership decided that Oliver Tambo, by then deputy president of the ANC, would best serve the movement by going into exile and building international ties that would mobilize support for reform within South Africa. With the dedicated support of his wife Adelaide, he became ambassador at large and established missions in 27 countries by 1990. He later took an active role in the organization of the armed struggle against apartheid. The ANC acted with speed because it suspected that the movement would be banned, just like what had happened in southern Rhodesia. So, on March 27, 1960, Tambo was driven by Ronald Siegel, the editor of the liberal journal Africa South, across the Bechuanaland, now Botswana, border. While in Bechuanaland, telegrams that Tambo sent to the United Nations, UN, were intercepted and passed on to the South African authorities. Tambo's stay in Bechuanaland, now Botswana, became perilous and haunted by the constant fear of being abducted and returned to South Africa. Yusuf Dadoo, the leader of the South African Communist Party, SACP, was also in Bechuanaland, now Botswana, having fled into exile. Frene Ginwala, who became Speaker of Parliament in democratic South Africa, arranged travel documents and transport for Tambo, Dadoo, and Siegel from the Indian consul in Kenya. The three men took off from Palapi in a chartered plane to Tanganyika, now Tanzania. After spending a night in Nyasaland, Malawi, they landed in Dar es Salaam, Tanganyika, where they were met by Ginwala, who took them to meet Julius Nyerere. After that, Tambo flew from Tanganyika to Nairobi, where he was issued with further travel documents by the Indian government. The next day, Tambo left for Tunisia, where he was invited by the General Secretary of the World Assembly Youth, David Wehrmark. It was here that he delivered his first speech outside the country. He also met President Habib Bourguiba of Tunis and was able to explain the ANC's position to him. From here he went to Ghana, where he had an audience with Kwame Nkrumah and explained the situation in South Africa. By this time, Tambo met with leaders of government all over the world, explaining to them the situation in South Africa, because at this point, apartheid was not known in the world. Thereafter, he flew to Egypt to enlist the support of the Egyptian leader, Colonel Gamal Abdel Nasser. From here, he flew to Ethiopia, where he met with the Non-European United Front, NEUF, a body made up of ANC and PAC exiles that was set up to work together with a common purpose. While in Ethiopia, he also addressed the first conference of African heads of state. At the same time, arrangements were made for Adelaide and the children to travel to Swaziland and from there to Ghana and then on to London. A farmer from Swaziland, Oliver Tedley, transported them across the border into Swaziland. After 6 frustrating weeks, Adelaide and the children left for Botswana, and from here landed in Accra, Ghana, 3 weeks later. A week later, on the 15th of September 1960, Adelaide and the children landed in London. Initially, they stayed with James Phillips, a South African exile. In the meantime, Tambo had to go to New York to address the UN. The family then moved into a flat, and Adelaide was able to find a job as a nurse at St. George's Hospital. There were times when she had to leave the children alone, locked up for the night, to work the night shift. In the years to come, Tambo saw very little of his family due to his hectic traveling and ANC commitments. Adelaide was forced to work between 12 and 20 hours per day to earn enough for the upkeep of the family. In addition, Adelaide opened her house to members of the ANC arriving in the United Kingdom. Tambo had little money and hardly spent his ANC allowance of £2 a week on himself, saving whatever he could for Christmas gifts and cards for his children. In January 1962, Tambo met Mandela and Joe Matthews in Dar es Salaam. Mandela, who had slipped out of the country, explained to him the details of the decision to launch MK and armed operations, and the ANC's need to cooperate closely with the SACP in this process. Mandela and Tambo then worked out a program for the external mission under the new circumstances, whereby the latter had to develop diplomatic support for MK. It was a hard thing to convince Tambo about armed struggle because Tambo was a devoted Christian. Only Mandela could do that. After Mandela convinced Tambo, Tambo asked Mandela to convince his wife, Adelaide. Mandela and Tambo traveled to a number of countries in North Africa. Together, they returned to London, where Mandela met with a number of important British officials and politicians. During this period, Tambo also led an ANC delegation to the formation of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, in Ethiopia in May 1963. In July 1963, the bulk of the MK High Command was arrested. With the incarceration of the Rivonia trialists, it fell upon Tambo to take up leadership of MK. In 1963, he visited the former USSR and China, hoping to gain support from these two countries. The USSR made £300,000 available to Tambo in 1964. He was later to say that it did not mean that since the ANC was accepting assistance from the USSR that it was aligned to the Russians. At the same time, he had worked to win over Western countries in order to gain support from them, but Western have been refusing to condemn apartheid. In 1964, Tambo arrived in Dar es Salaam to take up his post as head of MK and the ANC. He shared a guest house with other members from the ANC office. During 1963 and 1964, Tambo made a number of high-profile speeches to present the ANC to the world, the most prominent being one made to the UN in October 1963. This speech inspired the UN Resolution 18 of 11 October 1963, calling on the South African government to release all political prisoners. Tambo addressed the UN, where his passionate plea for the release of political prisoners received a standing ovation. It was at the UN that Tambo met E.S. Reddy, an Indian national who was the secretary of the Special Committee on Apartheid. The two men developed a long-lasting, enduring friendship. Over the years, Reddy became a useful ally of Tambo and the ANC. Support for the ANC's cause abroad also came from the London anti-apartheid movement. In 1964, Ronald Siegel, together with the London anti-apartheid movement and Tambo's involvement, organized an international conference on economic sanctions against South Africa. At the same time, MK and Zimbabwe People's Revolutionary Army, ZIPRA, began to work together with the aim of infiltrating Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe. In 1968, Tambo accompanied the MK group on a number of occasions when they went on reconnaissance expeditions along the Zambezi River, sleeping in the open with the group. Tambo named the group the Luthuli Detachment in honor of Chief Luthuli, who was killed in a tragic railway accident in July 1967 in Grootville, Natal, now KwaZulu-Natal. The Wankie Campaign was the first significant military campaign for the ANC. In spite of some victories against Rhodesian forces, the group was forced to retreat as they had to face the military might of the combined South African and Rhodesian forces. OR lived under constant pressure and stress, which at times affected his health, and given the demands of his position, he had little time to recuperate from illness. At the same time, there were strident criticisms from rank-and-file members over a host of issues ranging from military to social to political. A memorandum from Chris Hani's group that was incarcerated in Botswana following the Wankie Campaign issued a scathing memorandum, upon their release, of various senior ANC leaders and accused Tambo of failing to adhere to democratic principles. Tambo was disturbed by the memorandum and at the low morale in the camps. As a result, he decided to call a consultative conference of the ANC. He sent word secretly to the leadership on Robben Island about the conference. After months of intense preparation, the conference of about 700 ANC members in exile, MK and the Congress Alliance partners, took place on the 25th of April 1969 at Morogoro, Tanzania. In his address to the conference, Tambo emphasized that it was a consultative conference. At this meeting, Tambo tendered his resignation from the ANC following personal attacks. This threw the conference into disarray, and Tambo was persuaded to return. A new executive was elected, and Tambo was unanimously re-elected president. This position was endorsed by the leadership on Robben Island in a message conveyed by Mac Maharaj following his release from Robben Island. The leadership was restructured into the Revolutionary Council, chaired by Tambo, and included Yusuf Dadu, Reg September, and Joe Slovo. Tambo was kept updated about discussions on the island as he was briefed by prisoners who were released, and through correspondence, via various sources that he had clandestinely developed, was able to communicate to the leadership on the island. In the aftermath of the 1976 student rebellion, Tambo had to rethink ways of effectively managing the organization. He approached the Tanzanian government for a piece of land to establish a school for exiles. The school was named after Solomon Mahlangu, an MK guerrilla who was executed by the government after an attack on a warehouse on Gok Street, Johannesburg. He also recruited Paulo Jordan to develop Radio Freedom in Lusaka, on which Tambo often spoke, to broadcast ANC propaganda. Tambo reached out to other organizations such as the Black Consciousness Movement, BCM. However, the death of Steve Biko at the hands of the police in detention and the banning of other BCM activists meant that a planned meeting with the BCM leaders was set back. Rumors said a flight was organized to fly Biko to meet with Tambo. Imagine if that meeting had happened. The history of South Africa would be different today. Tambo also met a number of visiting homeland leaders, in particular Chief Mangosuthu Buthelezi of the Inkatha Freedom Party, IFP, in London. In 1978, Tambo headed a delegation to Vietnam, where they attended numerous lectures and met with activists in the Vietnamese struggles. Subsequent to this visit, he commissioned a politico-military strategy council to lay the groundwork for mass support and mass mobilization. The commission recommended a program whereby all opposition groups within the country would join forces around a broad program of opposition to apartheid. Tambo was very mindful of the rights of women. He commissioned a code of conduct that saw that women's rights are respected and upheld by all in the organization. He tried to ensure that the abuse of women was eradicated. Between 1983 and 1985, there were 2 mutinies in MK camps in Angola. Young cadres who wanted to be deployed back home mutinied when this did not take place. On January 8, 1985, Tambo delivered his most dramatic speech, calling on people to render South Africa ungovernable. Following the July 1985 state of emergency, he appealed to all South Africans, black and white, to make apartheid unworkable and the country ungovernable. With social unrest increasing and the apartheid government under pressure, Tambo stated that this alone was insufficient and that alternative people structures had to be built. This was a turning point of the struggle where apartheid was unworkable. The apartheid government was forced to negotiate, but because of their attitude, they avoided Tambo. They tried to divide Tambo and Mandela. They started to negotiate with Mandela in prison, but Mandela told apartheid's leaders that the leader of the ANC was Tambo, who was in Zambia. That is where apartheid was forced to send a negotiation team to meet with an ANC delegation that was led by Thabo Mbeki, who was a confidant of Tambo. That same year, Tambo and the ANC met a high-powered delegation of the foremost captains of industry from South Africa. This meeting was due to the efforts of Gavin Relly, a director at Anglo American. At this meeting, Tambo explained the ANC's position and fielded questions from the understandably apprehensive business people. Subsequent to this meeting, the National African Confederation of Commerce, a black business grouping, headed by Sam Matsunyana, also met with the ANC. In 1987, Tambo appointed a high-powered commission of ANC legal people to draw up a constitution to reflect the kind of country that the ANC wanted for the future. He also sat in on these meetings, often guiding the meetings. Tambo had consistently advocated support for a multi-party democracy and an entrenched Bill of Rights. Also in 1987, Tambo, together with others, conceived and headed a top-secret covert mission by MK, known as Operation Vula. Tambo chose the operatives to infiltrate into the country to work underground, establishing networks and arms caches. In 1988, Tambo appointed a president's team on negotiations to draw up the ANC's position and approach to the negotiations, drawing from viewpoints from the exiles and the mass democratic movement in the country. In the meantime, the South African establishment was secretly making moves to approach the ANC for negotiations through exploratory meetings. On May 31, 1989, Thabo Mbeki, after receiving the go-ahead from Tambo, called Professor Willie Esterhuis, who had been part of these meetings, to set up a meeting between the African National Congress and the South African National Intelligence Service. Mbeki was in many ways a protege of Tambo, as the pair worked very closely together. Following extensive discussions with the frontline state leaders, Tambo led and worked closely with the ANC team that drafted the Harare Declaration. The declaration acknowledged that there may be an opportunity for negotiations with the South African regime with the end of apartheid in mind. It explained the climate and principles that had to be created before negotiations could begin. Tambo's relationship with Robert Mugabe started very badly because he was an ally of Joshua Nkomo, but he worked hard to fix his relationship with Mugabe by sending Thabo Mbeki in the early 1980s. Pressure and exhaustion took their toll on Tambo, and in 1989 he suffered a severe stroke that resulted in him losing his speech. Following his stroke, he was rushed from Lusaka on Tony Rowland's executive plane on the order of President Kenneth Kaunda of Zambia to Harley Street in London. Rowland also paid for the medical treatment. Against the advice of his physician and the NEC, Tambo continued his punishing work schedule, traveling on ANC business. This was his second stroke, because he had had a first mild stroke in 1982. He suffered another stroke in 1991 while undergoing medical treatment in Sweden. Again, Rowland flew him back to London where he was treated. With the unbanning of the ANC in 1990 and the process of transition already underway, the entire Tambo family flew back to South Africa in December 1990. However, Tambo was unable to address the welcoming crowd at the airport due to his loss of speech. A welcome rally was organized at Orlando Stadium, attended by a crowd of 70,000 people. At the ANC conference in Durban in 1991, Tambo declined to stand for any position. The position of national chairman was created in his honor. Nelson Mandela was elected president of the organization. Tambo is celebrated the most in the African National Congress and was its longest-serving president. During his presidency, there was no breakaway from the African National Congress, and he ran the movement during the most difficult time of apartheid. He came up with the 4 pillars of fighting apartheid: armed struggle, an internal underground, popular mobilization, and international isolation of the apartheid regime. It was not easy to lead the African National Congress in those years. He was the only man who could manage it. Even when he wanted to step down, members and leaders would beg him to continue leading. Today, the African National Congress is known as the Movement of Tambo, or its members are called Makabanika Tambo, Tambo's comrades. There are more struggle songs about him than any other leader in the country. In 1991, Tambo was installed as Chancellor of the University of Fort Hare. In February 1993, he opened a large international conference in Johannesburg, chaired by Thabo Mbeki. Foreign dignitaries and representatives of anti-apartheid movements filled the hall to listen to Tambo thank their countries and organizations for their contribution in helping to end apartheid. Despite his illness, Tambo came to the ANC office in Johannesburg every day and still addressed public meetings of organizations. During the early hours of the morning of the 24th of April, 1993, Oliver Reginald Tambo passed away after a heart attack. He was honored with a state funeral where scores of friends, supporters, colleagues, and heads of state bade him farewell. His epitaph reads, in his own words, "It is our responsibility to break down barriers of division and create a country where there will be neither whites nor blacks, just South Africans, free and united in diversity." If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more stories of African leaders. Let us know in the comments which other leaders you would like us to cover next.